to talk about the specific issues, like, well, okay, you've defined yourself, but what do you actually care about? There's a few things that we care about. We tend to be, I like to say, the capitalist wing of the Democratic Party. We think markets are great. Markets lead to a lot of prosperity. It doesn't mean markets are perfect and that they can never fail, but markets fundamentally are pretty good in a lot of ways.
How do you feel like the Democrats are maybe not addressing that then right now? Like, where do you think they're failing on capitalism?
Um, it's interesting because capitalism is such a big word. I prefer to break it down into more specific issues like housing. I talk about housing all the time, and I get really mad about housing all the time. And one of the things that makes me mad is that we can't just get out of our own way and build more housing. A lot of this is a democratic issue because virtually every city in America of any meaningful size is controlled by Democrats. Every big city in America, to some first approximation, the mayor is a Democrat and the city council is controlled by Democrats and so forth. And in all of our biggest cities and in our most prosperous cities, and the cities where there's all this innovation happening, San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, we can't build enough housing and we have acute housing crises. And it's because of, overregulation. It's because of zoning laws. It's because of all these arcane little things, floor area ratios and setbacks and environmental reviews and community input sessions that you're mandated to have 10 of them over the course of 2 years before you can build anything. And there's this bureaucratic kludge that is very much supported by local Democrats on city councils and in, state legislatures that stops you from just doing the very simple thing of building more housing. And we know that that works. We know that if you build more housing, rents go down. There's just an enormous pile of evidence for that.
How do you incentivize people to want to do that? Because when you say, so for instance, when you say like rents go down, this is always like one of the reasons why I feel like housing is such an intractable issue, is if you bring rents down, it's good for people that are moving into the city, and it can be good for some people in the city, but I feel like your strongest voter base always stands to lose the most. Like when you say rents go down, people that own buildings there don't want rents to go down.
Yeah,
or when you say it brings down property values, it makes it more affordable, well, homeowners, your strongest voter base, like don't want homes to be more affordable. They want the prices to go up.
This is the home voter theory, yeah.
Okay.
And there's some legitimacy to this, I think. I think it's one reason that there is resistance to building more housing, right? But I don't think it's the only reason, and I'm not sure that it's the dominant reason. I think a lot of it is genuine kind of fear of change, that people just kind of like their neighborhoods the way they are. And if if you're not actively paying, $3,500 a month for rent for like a 1-bedroom apartment, then you don't feel like anything needs to change. And, you don't like that there's a lot of construction and noise and new people in the neighborhood. And I think that kind of just generic resistance to change is a lot of what drives this. And, there's other things as well. There's people who are concerned about the environment, which I think is, I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but I think that there are people who feel that way. So I think you hammer this from a couple ways in terms of, one of the things I've found most effective is that you play on the generation gap, because there's a lot of people who are older, who are Gen X or who are boomers, who own their own homes, and they're doing quite well. But they've actually started to notice at this point that their kids can't afford to live near them because their kids can't buy a house because of the housing crisis that we have. And I've had pretty good success appealing to that. Like, don't you want your kid to be able to buy a house? Yes, you're doing very well. What about your son, he's got a good job. He's out of college. He's done everything right, and he still can't afford a house. Sometimes that works. There's all these kind of little tactical tricks that I have when talking to people, but that's one that I find is often pretty good.
Is there any city right now in the U.S.? I think somebody sent me an email on Minneapolis. There was one city that was that the one? There was one that like just basically cleared for a bunch of new housing units to be constructed, and as expected, like the prices came down. It typically benefited anybody or everybody. Are there other major cities that are making any progress on this, or is this like a dead issue in every major metropolis? Yeah.
So Minneapolis has done a lot of really good stuff. Minneapolis abolished single-family zoning, and importantly, for people who react to that, it doesn't mean they abolished single-family housing, but they abolished single-family zoning that says you can in this wide area of the city, and it's in most cities it's a lot of it. Like Seattle, for instance, a big city, something like 80 to 90% of Seattle is zoned so that only single family homes can be built there.
Yeah, there's the classic neoliberal subreddit picture of San Francisco where it's like people think San Francisco is this and it's downtown and it's actually this, and it's like miles and
Yeah.
miles and miles of sprawling fucking housing.
And we're
development
not
in
even
suburbs,
talking
yeah.
about the suburbs. We're talking about
No,
just
yeah,
the city limits
Yeah.
Do
of
people
San
want to
Francisco.
change this though? Like I feel like I
Yeah.
could see so much resistance. Like I think single family homes are kind of arcane, but it feels like that's what most people want though. Like I feel like if you zoned for something different,
And I
you'd be
think that's fine.
People would be upset.
I think what you should do is you should allow property owners the option of you can build a single family home on this plot of land, or you can build a duplex, or you can build a fourplex. And we're not even getting into anything radical. We're not even getting into the more libertarian case of, well, you should be able to build a tower on your house. But just that kind of gentle density is what I think Minneapolis legalized in terms of like up to fourplexes are legal now to build everywhere. You don't have to. You could still build single family home if you want to. They also did a lot of stuff. They funded like subsidized affordable housing. They legalized and made it much easier to build ADUs, which are additional dwelling units. Think about like a grandma flat or a little add-on to your house in the back or whatever.
And California, or was it just LA or San Francisco, approved these, and some people were
California
happy,
has.
some people were losing their minds. Yeah.
Yeah, California has, and like something like a third of California's new housing last year was ADUs. Like it's crazy. But Minneapolis is one of the few democratic cities in a democratic state, democratic stronghold, that is really doing very well on this. The other places that are doing very well, and politically this makes me sad, even though I want everywhere to build more housing, is typically red states. Florida is building a ton of housing. Texas's big cities are all building a ton of housing. Austin, Texas is unrecognizable from what it was, 20 years ago, 10 years ago even.
And this is just by stripping zoning, basically.
I mean, it's just it's complicated because every city has their own layers of stuff. Like you can get into so much detail here. You can talk about floor area ratios and what kind of environmental reviews you have, what kind of labor standards you're held to, what kind of parking requirements you have, what kind of there's all this like alphabet soup of stuff that you have to do to build anything in America. Right. And so different cities will be more and less strict on different things. But just in general, all major cities in Texas in general make it very easy to build. They have less of that stuff. Whereas, in San Francisco and New York and a lot of the deepest blue areas of the country, it's nearly impossible to build. There's one development near me in New York. It's called the Lirio, and it's like affordable housing being built, and it still hasn't broken ground yet. We're recording this in March 2024. This was first proposed as part of the Bloomberg administration's plan in like 2008 to build more housing. And it took them 5 years from that just to agree with a site the housing was going to be built on. And it's taken them 10 years to get community input sign off and environmental reviews. And the local Democratic Club was really angry that they had low income carve outs, but not low and medium income carve outs. And these are all actual fights that were being had. And the net result is that it's like 15 years later and a shovel has still not hit the ground.
What do you think? What did Minneapolis do right to, I guess, lubricate, to ease the, I guess, burden, or to get rid of all the friction between building stuff? Why Minneapolis? Why were they the only ones? What did they do differently?
One of the phrases that I think is helpful here is the phrase by right. And it means that if you want to build something, you can build it without having to go through a lot of process. In San Francisco, for instance, virtually everything is discretionary. If you want to build a development of some kind, it has to go before the board of supervisors, is what they call their city council in San Francisco, and they have to approve it. And there's no process for just, well, I have this land, I want to build this thing, I can just do it. No, everything is discretionary. Everything has to be bargained over, and they'll find things they don't like, the board of supervisors, and they'll ask you to do more stuff and blah, 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 blah. Whereas by right, you fill out a form, you say, this is my land, it is zoned this way, I am building something that fits within that zone, here's the form, thank you, I'm about to build it. And that's a little bit of a simplification, but Minneapolis made, I think, like up to fourplex housing by right. And so single family zoning doesn't exist. If you want to build something more, if you want to build an ADU, they got rid of a lot of that kludge. And so to kind of back us back out of housing, a lot of, I think, what we advocate for is this kind of approach where we want markets to work. We want people to be able to build stuff. A lot of times when you hear that, it's a very libertarian take where people want to get the state out of the way, and then they also want to cut the welfare state. And we have the view that, the welfare state is actually very good. It's good for society to have a strong social safety net, and that provides a lot of value. It lets people take more risk. It actually lets them be more entrepreneurial if they have something to fall back on. So we're people who are in favor of a pretty strong safety net, while also getting rid of a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape and just what's called like kludge that stops people from building, whether it's building housing. The same kind of stuff happens when they're trying to build green energy. The same kind of thing happens like with the big CHIPS Act that President Biden signed into law, I think last year or maybe 2022. CHIPS Act allocates this giant pile of money to build semiconductor plants in the US because it's such a geopolitically strategic thing to do, right? That we want some of that here. And yet, despite this giant pile of money, very little of it, almost nothing, has been actually allocated yet because there's rules, there's processes. You've got to bargain with all the unions. You've got to pass all these environmental reviews. You've got to import workers from Taiwan because we don't have enough skilled semiconductor workers, and that gets caught in. And it's just this endless list of things you have to do before any of the money can even be spent. And, Democrats are always very happy to cut giant checks, which can be good in some circumstances, but they're not willing to cut the paperwork and cut the red tape. Yeah, in order to make that cash work.